a bit more into shellfish. And I've been able to go out on some really big commercial boats since then. And so I've been out on commercial scallop boats, but also kind of in smaller areas. And so out in the field and doing some sort of work. And in 2021, I started in the graduate program at Rutgers in oceanography. And that is a bit about myself and kind of how I got to where I am and going into what my research focuses on, which is ecosystem services. Why do they want to go to the next slide? Okay. Ecosystem services are essentially the different goods and services that the environment provides for people. And I like to think of it as the relationship sometimes that we have to maintain with the environment. And so for the environment to keep doing things for us, we have to continue to take care of the environment. And so ecosystem services as a whole kind of includes 4 different groups. And so you have provisioning, regulating services, you have cultural, while also supporting. And all of these can look different depending on kind of the systems that they're in, but they all have the same benefits. And so ecosystem services can include aquaculture. And so here, even with farmers working on a farm or filtration of oysters, which filter out things out of the water. All of these things are considered ecosystem services, as we as people need clean water to survive, but also the aquaculture aspect of it cultivates food for people, while also the shellfish are filtering the water within that regard. And so specifically the part of ecosystem services that I focus on in my research is, oh, come on. Here we go, is habitat provisioning. And habitat provisioning refers to a structure from some sort providing the different functional qualities of a normal habitat. And a typical definition for habitat is a place or an environment where a plant or animal naturally or normally lives and grows, which basically entails structure, any sort of 3D structure you can imagine. And these look different depending on those different habitats. And so in terrestrial systems on land, you have bees. Bees don't necessarily have a home all the time, but they can make their own home. And so they're able to build hives, which are a type of structure that are their homes. Birds make bird nests, which are a type of structure, 3D structure that are their homes. And even if their animals are not able to make their own homes, then nature sometimes provides those homes with caves where like bears and fox and wolves call home as well. In marine systems, these can look slightly different, but they have the same function. And so in hydrothermal vents, which are vents very deep in the ocean that spew out a lot of different elements in hot water, they congregate a lot of animals like shellfish and crabs tend to congregate here that provide habitat. And coral reefs are a living structure, but also provide habitat for a lot of different animals. Same thing with oyster reefs, and oyster reefs are a living organism, but their structure provides habitat for fish, other invertebrates, including crabs and shrimp. And the same goes for different marsh areas. But as these areas are starting to decline a bit because of climate change, there has to be kind of a different way to kind of consider the different habitats and how they're changing in the environment. And one of the ways that I'm trying to do that is through aquaculture. And so aquaculture is a method of farming some sort of aquatic animal in the water. And this can be finfish, it can be shellfish. And so, but there's different types of aquaculture. And so there's freshwater aquaculture, which tends to happen more so on land. There's a lot more finfish. So you have your tilapia, your trout tend to be more freshwater aquaculture systems, and they can be for commercial use or recreational. And what I mean by commercial, I'm referring to food production and those type of things, but also recreational in terms of sometimes if you go fishing in lakes, sometimes the fish in those lakes are stocked via aquaculture. And so that's where those things come from sometimes. And then you have saltwater aquaculture, or sometimes referred to as mariculture, mar coming from marine, meaning saltwater. And so it tends to be either on the ocean or somewhere in a coastal area where ocean water and bays where ocean water is. And it can be for finfish like salmon, pins, or it can be shellfish, which can be oysters, it can be scallops, it can be clams. All of those different shellfish are typically farmed in aquaculture systems in the ocean or using marine water. And they typically have commercial use, but they can also have medical use. And so sometimes animals that are used in medical studies for different things can also be grown via aquaculture. And aquaculture itself has different functions of habitat provisioning, and you have those same kind of categories, whether or ecosystem services. So you still have the same categories of provisioning and regulating and culture and the habitat and supporting. But with aquaculture, you have to consider more of the different things. And so you have to consider the type of farm method that you want to use, the wave energy and how active that area is. You have to think of what the bottom looks like, how much algae is in the water, how many animals do you putting out? And so my research focuses on this area because there's not as much research done here, and I'm trying to help fill in those different gaps. And so my current research is focusing on these specific type of farming methods, also referred to as gears. And so these two gears are commonly used in oyster farming, and these are floating bags, and they are what they sound like. They're a mesh bag that floats on the surface, and so the oysters go inside this bag, and they are technically never out of the water. And so they're able to stay in the water the entire time and feed as much as they want to and grow that way. But then you also have off-bottom cages. And although the cage itself is sitting on the bottom, the oysters are not sitting on the bottom. And so there's, if you can kind of tell, there's different shelves or racks in these cages. And so these bags will go into the racks, and that's where the oysters live, or in these type of bags. And these are two common farming practices in New Jersey, where I currently am. And then another question is, because these gear types are different, another area that I'm interested in is mussel long lines. And so mussel long lines are rope in which the mussels are attached to those ropes, and the ropes hang down about 50 to 60 feet within the water column. And these two different farm methods are very different. They are catered to different animals. And so this is what helps mussels grow better, and this is what helps oysters grow better. But the question I'm trying to determine is how other organisms are able to use these as habitat. And so the objectives for my research were to document how fish are interacting with mussel longlines in Maine, because that's where mussel longlines are more common compared to in New Jersey, where I currently am, but then also looking at how fish are interacting with those other two gear types of off-bottom cages and floating bags here in New Jersey. But then also wanting to compare how well the video method works compared to some of the other traditional methods for collecting this data, which can sometimes be damaging to the environment, whether that's dredges or pull nets. You tend to disturb a lot of the natural environment more in those compared to the method that I am using. And so the locations for my study are New Jersey and Maine. And so in Maine, my data was collected in Blue Hill Bay, which is on the southern side of Mount Desert, in Acadia National Park. And then in New Jersey, it is in Barnegat Bay. And the two environments as a whole look different, even though they're geographically not in the same place. And so Barnegat Bay is more of marsh estuary. It's a shallow tidal area. And the waters tend to be a bit warmer, which are better for oysters. And in Blue Hill Bay, it was a more coastal environment. It's a more rocky intertidal coastline. There's not as much grasses and vegetation as there is in New Jersey. The water is a lot deeper. The mussel longlines go, as I said, about 40 to 60 feet deep into the water. And the waters are colder, which the mussels like because they grow better in colder water. So I collect my data using underwater video, specifically GoPro cameras. And so what I do is I attach the cameras to the gears in different ways, and the best way to kind of see what's happening. And so on the cages, the camera gets attached to either the top or the sides of the cage. On the floating bag, the camera gets attached to the underside of the bag so that it's always in the water. And for the mussel longlines, I had to do it a bit different because there's not a hard structure for me to attach to. And so the camera is attached to a line or a rope that is suspended from the same raft in which the mussels are attached to. So I'm going to show you a bit of these videos, and hopefully Some of them are cool, and some of them you recognize some of the fish potentially if they are common in your area. So these are some of the mussel long lines. You can tell how biophilic they are, meaning there's a bunch of other animals growing on the lines as well. And so you have encrusting sponges and a whole bunch of type of algae. Here in the corner, you have a cunner, which is a type of fish that are known to like structure and being around something that makes them feel safe. And he's eating a lot of the things that are growing on these lines. And so it's providing a source of structure and shelter for him, but also a source of food. Here you have a chasing behavior. And so there is a fish over here and there's a fish down here. This fish comes around and they play loop-de-loop around the lines a couple of times before he loses the other fish. And so this fish is probably saying, this is my territory, this is my area, I don't want you here. And so this is probably what this behavior is telling. And this is also a cunner, and you can also still see how foul these lines are. And these videos were taken about 15 feet deep in the water column. And there's another chasing behavior of a fish here, and this fish comes up here. Even though this fish looks about the same size, he still doesn't want anything to do with that other fish. And so comes back around, but he's by himself, so he lost the other fish. Yep. And this is really murky, so I apologize for that, but the farmers were working and tossing a lot of this biofouling over the side, but you have more cunner, and you can kind of see them congregating back here around the lines. There's starfish that attach to the line, for the starfish also eat shellfish as well. Another common thing that we saw were jellyfish, and so here you have a moon jelly. Jellyfish are actually considered plankton because they're not very good at actively swimming very well, and so this one is kind of just being pushed along with the current, as you can see. But sometimes if the current is slow enough, you can see that they can move pretty well. This is sped up, he's not actually swimming as fast. But you can see he's better at moving around the water than the other one was. And here we have a small little bunker, an Atlantic manhu, and these are typically schooling fish, and so he probably lost his school and is just hanging out in the line with shelter so we can find another group to rejoin. Here, and this one is hard to see, I apologize. This is a comb jelly, and so you can kind of see the cilia and the bioluminescence that goes through. And they're also considered a type of plankton because he's just flowing along with the water column. He's not a very good swimmer. Here you have a lion's mane jellyfish, and this is a really small one. These guys can get really, really big. These are where all of the skating parts are, and so if you ever see a jellyfish, this is the part which you want to avoid. And here you have a rock gunner, which is a really small fish. He's not a very big guy. He likes to hang out in the algae. You have another single mussel line with another cunner, but you have a bunch of polyps that are feeding on a lot of the biofouling that the farmers, as they're working off the side of the boat. And so they're just eating a lot of the things that are falling off of the lines rather than foraging directly on the lines like the cunner acid. Here's just a close-up of some of the mussels, and so you can see that they're open and they're feeding. And so actually these long tendrils are mussel poop. And so shellfish can actually eat and poop at the same time, which is kind of gross and cool. But yep, these are actively feeding mussels. Now I'm going to show you some of the videos from New Jersey. So this is the bottom of the bag, and you can already kind of see a lot of the fouling on it. And so the fouling looks different because the organisms are different. And so a lot of these smaller fish, although they look big because they're really close to the screen, are mummy chows. They're smaller fish. They tend to live in estuary brackish waters. Then you have some small silver sides. And this fish making its way up towards the front is a gray snapper. And he's a younger gray snapper, probably hanging out until he's a full adult so he can protect himself in open waters better. All these speckles at the bottom are actually mud snails. So you can tell this is a lot shallower environment. The bag is closer to the bottom. Again, you have the underside of the bag with a bunch of fouling. You have a lot of tunicates and sponges and algae growing, but you also have a blue crab that likes to hang out. And so he's walking upside down under the bag. And as he's walking, you can also see grass shrimp that call this place home. And so they're probably eating and living all at the same time on this bag with all of the fouling that's happening. And he just gets closer to the camera. This is also floating bags. You can again see how shallow this area is, but you have a diamondback terrapin, which is a type of aquatic turtle that also ventures to land sometimes. But he's checking out the bags, potentially see if there's food for him. Here we have a feathered blenny. There's quite a few of them, and all of the fouling on this bag. This bag is heavily fouled, but you can also see a lot of Atlantic silversides, and they can be hard to see because they're translucent, but they're like that because it makes other things harder for them to see them. So they can avoid predators, but they're also schooling fish, so they'd like to tend to hang out in bigger groups like this. There's another one that's decided to make its view. And here we have a large school of spot that come through, and so the farm sometimes can be stopping point for migrating fish, as it provides a place of shelter, but also sometimes a food source. And so this is slower if you missed it, as if swimming by and probably going along on their next part of the journey. It's another part where there's a large school or shoal of mummy chops that come through. I'm sorry about the wobbling in this one. This is a really turbulent video. But you can see there's still a bunch of fouling happening, and they're hiding under the bag for shelter, but also kind of checking out the underneath side for different food particles that they potentially eat as well. And then here is going to be kind of hard to see, but this inshore lizardfish, he comes in really quickly right here, and this is not sped up. That is how fastly he came in. And so he'll scoot along over here, and he'll kind of wait here. And so inshore lizardfish are predatory attack fish, and so they lie in wait until something comes by and catches their eye. So here we have another fish hiding in the algae. That's using it as home and shelter, and it's a young tautog. But now this lizardfish just found something, and he's gone in a second. And just slow it down so you can see how fast he actually disappears. He swims really quickly, really fast ambush predator. But that fish also went away because he knew that he was also possibly in danger. Here we have a puffer fish. He's a happy puffer fish, so he's not big and blown up, but he's probably looking for something to eat. So puffer fish also eat hard things like shellfish and crabs and shrimp. So they have a little beak that's modified for that. Here we have a group of silver perch that are probably resting and chilling out from a long group swim and catching up on some rest/sleep. And here we have a school of mullet coming through as they check out the bag, probably migrating somewhere and checking to see if this is a place that they want to stop and have food or a snack before they continue on their journey to their mating ground. Here we have a sheep's head. You see he's foraging on the bag and little biofouling that's growing along there, which are another common fish in New Jersey. But here we also have a punter, which we saw in Maine as well, also feeding. And as I said, they're light structured, so he's actually inside the cage this time, feeding on the different things. And finally, we have a little spider crab. This is a female spider crab, and she is covered in biofouling, which makes it hard for other things to see her, so she can't be predated on as easily. And so although you basically just watched a bunch of fish data videos, those are data from my project. And so why is this important? And so I'm using this data hopefully to go into the policy process in terms of regulation for aquaculture, but also within the leasing process to help farmers to be able to obtain leases that they might not have been able to before. But also for the ecosystem interactions. With climate change, the environment is changing a lot, and aquaculture is continuing to grow. And so there needs to be more understanding of what that interaction looks like with the gear, not just the animals that are going into the area. And so I'm hoping that this data will help in all of those different regards and aspects, and hopefully will make a difference in these groups someday. And if you guys are interested in more underwater videos of fish, I'm sure you can probably Google a lot of different fishermen who throw cameras off of pier, so you can see kind of the fish community there. Specifically for our lab, if you go to YouTube and type the Monroe Lab, it's the first lab YouTube page that'll come up there. You can find some more fish videos. But also this project was partnered with the NOAA Milford Lab, in which they're doing a larger project and kind of doing the same thing, where they've grouped a lot of data similar to mine and from other places as well to go into a lot of these things that I mentioned in the previous slides. So if you just Google normal for live and click the first link, and then on the page search GoPro, the first link come up should be more videos, include more about the project and what's actually going on. And so I hope that this was informative, kind of what is in your area, could be in your area, and might help suggest that you buy from aquaculture and farmers in local areas. But with that, I will take any questions. I can also stop screen share. My pointer will work.
All right, I see we've got lots of really cool questions from our lovely audience members. So there are quite a few questions about, have you ever seen any kind of shark in the water?
I have not seen any sharks on the videos, but I know that there are sharks in the area. And so they probably were avoiding the area if they knew that people were around. And the videos were collected typically while there was light out so that we could see what's in the videos, and sharks sometimes tend to be active. And the darker times are when there's not as much light out, which makes it harder to see them on the videos, but they're definitely in the area.
Okay, thank you. And do you ever have to get in the water for your research, or do you do it all with videos?
Sometimes I do have to get in the water. So in the farm in New Jersey, you saw how shallow it was to deploy all of those cameras. You have to get into the water and kind of walk around and attach them all. In Maine, the water is a lot deeper and a lot colder, and so I kind of have to shuffle around on the raft and be careful, hopefully not to fall in, so that I don't scratch up myself too bad with all of the muscle lines. But sometimes it does require getting in the water.
Okay. Have you ever seen a whale or an alligator anytime in your life?
I've seen quite a few whales, and I have seen quite a few alligators. Living in Georgia, being close to Florida, you see a lot of gators sometimes depending on the waters that you're in. But on a lot of the bigger boats that I've been on, in the RV Sekuliak and that large commercial scallop boat, when you go out to like shelf waters, you can see a lot of whales depending on the time of year and as they're making their trek either to feeding grounds or to breeding grounds.
Awesome. What is the coolest thing you've ever seen underwater?
The coolest thing I've ever seen underwater. I would say probably a sea turtle. This was a completely different project, but also using underwater videos. But a sea turtle checking out a bait bag and kind of having its time trying to open a bait bag and get the fish inside. But that was pretty cool. It was a pretty big turtle.
Okay. Have you ever seen a squid or an octopus?
Sometimes in the New Jersey videos and the smaller ones, if there's a tiny squid, you can see it. But sometimes if the quality is not great, it can be hard to see some of the squids. But I have not seen an octopus in any of the videos, but I've seen one in real life doing fun things in water.
Okay. Have you ever seen a river salmon?
I have not seen a river salmon. That would be pretty cool to see.
That would be cool. All right, let's see. What is the most crabs you've ever seen at a time?
So the most crabs, blue crabs tend to be solitary animals. So if you're referring to the crab that was walking towards the camera, but when they do get around each other, they can be kind of mean and they fight all the time. So I probably have only seen like 2 or 3 at once. But like hermit crabs, you can see a lot of sometimes in the videos in the bottom, you can see them crawling around if you speed it up. Because if you're not paying attention, it's slowly moving. But then if you speed up the video, sometimes you can see how fast it's walked along.
Oh, cool. What is your favorite fish?
Oh, I think at the moment, one of my favorite fish are the mummy chogs. Is the little fish that was in the first video. They kind of have like little round bellies. They're kind of like I like to think of them sometimes like the dogs of the fish world. They're kind of very docile. They don't require a whole lot, and they're cute little things that kind of eat whatever you give them. They're sometimes happy to see people, especially if they know you have food. So I would say that's one of my favorite fish.
Yeah, they're pretty cute. I've actually held one in my hand with water before, and it just kind of swam around in my hand.
Yeah.
Have you, oh, and I also see they're asking what my favorite fish is. My favorite fish is an octopus. I really like the giant Pacific octopus. I think they're so cool. Have you ever seen clownfish?
I have not seen clownfish in any of our videos. Those tend to reside on more coral reefs, but I have seen them in aquariums. And they're pretty cool fish as well.
Okay. We also have questions about some more exotic fish that you probably wouldn't have seen in your work, but maybe in your life. Have you ever seen a sea bunny, a Mexican walking fish, or an axolotl?
I have seen a sea bunny and an axolotl, but not a Mexican walking fish. That one I'm not familiar with. I will have to look that one
Very cool.
up.
Mexican walking fish, they actually can like run from one puddle to the next, and they just do their fin, they're like modified like bottom pectoral fins, and they can run from like one pond to the next. Have you ever seen a goldfish?
I have seen a goldfish. I used to keep goldfish while I was younger. That's kind of how all of this started. I was only allowed to have fish growing up. I wasn't allowed to have cats or dogs. So fish is what started my interest in science.
Ah, I like that. What did you want to be when you were a kid? What did you think you would be when you grew up?
Um, when I was younger, I thought I would be like a medical doctor because I knew I liked science. But being in Michigan, which although it's surrounded by the Great Lakes, is still not a whole lot of environmental or marine things. And so I wasn't exposed to a lot of it besides the fish that I own. And so when I figured out that I could major in things that allowed me to work with fish and marine systems and be by the ocean, that's what I decided to do.
Fair enough. It seems like a pretty cool job. Did you know, or do you know if crabs can pop off their claws like lobsters do?
Um, I don't know if they willingly do, but I know that they can.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can still survive if they lose a claw in a fight. That's how blue crabs fight. Sometimes they'll try to rip the other male's claw off so that he doesn't have any way to protect himself. But I don't know if they can actually detach them willingly if they needed to get away.
Good to know. How hard is your job?
Currently being a full-time student sometimes can be hard, but it's mostly stressful of trying to make sure that I stay up on top of all of the work that I have to do. So making sure that I have all my homework done when I need it to be done, or when it's due, making sure that I'm keeping up with the things happening in the field. So whether that's reading new papers as they come out, and working with my data all at the same time.
That makes sense. That seems like it'd be a lot to do. Have you ever seen a lionfish?
I have seen a lionfish in my research that I have done in Florida. And so they're kind of all over the place in Florida. And so they're an invasive species. And so although they're not really wanted there, but they're a pretty docile fish, actually. They don't move very much because there's not a lot of things that can eat them. And so they don't run away when people come around because they're not used to having to run away.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a lobster?
I have seen a lobster. I saw quite a few lobsters when I was up there in Maine this summer. And all of the lobster pots, they come with them. I like to call the sprinkle, the buoys, the lobster sprinkles, because that's what they look like. They're all different colors on the surface. And they kind of go for miles, it feels like sometimes.
I like that. What is the biggest fish you've ever seen?
The biggest fish I have ever seen has been a whale shark. And that is actually the biggest fish in the ocean. So it was pretty cool.
That sounds really cool. I would love to see a whale shark myself.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a tiger shark?
I have not seen a tiger shark, but I have seen a black tip shark before.
Okay. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Oh, I think I would want to talk to animals. Sometimes it would make my research easier if I could just talk to them, but it would also, I think, help a lot in terms of making the relationship better between animals and humans sometimes in certain situations. So you would be able to kind of know when they're not happy, when they're not feeling well, when they've done something they're not supposed to, and you don't know yet. So
I agree. I would pick the same one. Yeah, I would pick the same superpower for sure. What is the weirdest fish you've ever seen?
Oh, the weirdest fish. I would say a monkfish. While fishing on a lot of commercial boats, they come up a lot and they're not the cutest fish. Um, they're kind of big and slimy and have massive mouths with a bunch of spiky teeth. I would say that's probably the weirdest fish I've seen.
Fair enough. Have you ever seen a stingray with spots?
I have not seen a stingray with spots. I have seen manta rays, and I've seen a lot of cownose rays. They're migrating more to the area, and a lot of smaller rays, but not a spotted ray.
Okay. Why did you choose to study marine biology?
I chose marine biology mostly because I felt connected with it because was only allowed to have fish when I was younger. But it also allowed me to work around people that like the same things. And so sometimes I don't like to talk to people as much sometimes, but being able to talk to them about things we have in common is also really nice. And so liking marine animals is a big part of that.
Yeah. How do you collaborate with other scientists?
So typically it always starts with a conversation, whether it's you introducing yourself or you meet each other at a meeting or you have an idea or a question. And that's kind of how it starts, and you start talking kind of about potentially how something could work, or if you know that there's something that you might be interested in and that someone is working on, reaching out to someone, whether that's via email or if you have a phone number to get in contact with someone. It's typically how I tend to collaborate with authors or other scientists on different projects. And there you can figure out all of the other logistics of funding, when you need to do the research, and all of those other things.
All right, thank you. What fish do you most want to see that you haven't seen yet?
Oh, I think would be a sunfish. I have yet to see a sunfish, but I think they're really cool, but they're also really elusive and hard to find sometimes, even though they hang out near the surface. But I think it would be really cool to see a sunfish.
I agree. I would love to see some sunfish hanging out with their little fin up. What is the smallest fish you've ever seen?
Oh, the smallest fish I've ever seen is probably a skillet fish. And so they're a type of fish that kind of have a suction cup on the bottom of them, so then they kind of just stick to the sides of things. And so sometimes they can be in the videos that I showed you, but they can be hard to see because they camouflage really well into the backgrounds. Because they're also sticking to the sides, you don't really see them move very much. And so that's one of the smallest fish I think I've seen. They're probably like an inch.
Ooh, they sound very small. All right, so we're getting towards the end of this. So I have my two final questions. What are you most excited about in your whole field right now?
I think I'm really excited about part of this project in terms that means collaboration. And so a lot of time in science, you can collect as much data, you can think you have all of the answers, but sometimes you don't really know what to do with those answers. And so I'm enjoying the process of the work that I'm doing being put to some good or some use. That's the part I'm really excited about. I think it's happening a lot more with a lot of changes that are happening in the environment, and a lot more people collaborating in areas that they might not have before.
Yeah. And then my last question for you is going to be, what's your favorite part of your job?
My favorite part of my job, I would say, is actually doing the research. I like being out in the field. I like collecting data. And even then, I still like watching the videos and being able to analyze it, but I like being outside and being able to be in the field and see all of the things happening while they're happening. I would say that's one of my favorite parts of my job.
Yeah, I can agree. I think the field science would be my favorite part too. So I'm going to pause the recording if y'all want to stay on for just one more second.